Okay, I think we can get started. It's great to see all of you today. I appreciate you joining. The way we thought we'd run this AMA is we'd start out with a list of questions that have been gathered beforehand. And then once I've gone through that, since that might be some of the frequently asked questions, we can then open it up for other discussion, other questions that people have. So I will start with the list that I have. One is about my background, what is my experience in tech, and how long have I worked in crypto. So my career before joining crypto was a long one. I'm about 50 now, so I've been working for a long time. I worked in tech consulting for most of that time. And that was, I worked for big professional services firms like PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte. So I had clients that were mostly Fortune 500 companies working on a variety of different types of, sorry, my cat wants to say hi. Working on a lot of different types of projects across software development, IT infrastructure, really everything across the board. The last 10 years or so that I was in consulting, I did M&A work. So that was really a cross of everything put together, because it was really the process of like putting two big companies together or tearing two companies apart. And so it was kind of like a rapid transformation of all of IT, including all the business processes, all the systems, all the applications, everything all at one time. So I've had a pretty broad background in terms of technology, and I also did a startup in the middle there for a little while. I helped found Tektura, which was a software as a service provider, although they didn't even really have that term back then because this was in 2004. I helped lead the technology team that built their flagship application, which was their construction payment management solution. That was really the majority of their revenue as a company, and they went on to do a successful IPO and then were eventually acquired by Oracle. So that was a pretty successful startup. I think Oracle paid about $663 million for them. So it was a pretty successful venture. I bring that up partly because it is relevant. It was a payment related application. Frankly, if I were designing that application today, I might be using blockchain for it because a lot of it would tie in. There was a lot of escrow and trading payments for documents and things like that. And so I think, frankly, it would fit very well with blockchain. Maybe Oracle will do something like that with it at some point. But in terms of crypto, I got involved with Four right around the time it launched. I wasn't involved with the creation of Four, but in 2017 it launched, and I was first an investor, and then I joined the team as a contributor, just contributing code to it, and then eventually became the CEO. I left my consulting job full-time in 2019, so I've been full-time doing crypto since then and been focused on Four and related projects since that time. In terms of Graphene, of course, that really grew out of Four and was originally intended as part of the original Four vision to be something where we would do what we called side chains, where you would have a smart contract blockchain that was branching off from the Four blockchain. But our developer that was working on it seemed to think that wasn't really a fully thought through or secure solution and thought we should start over with a new blockchain. And we eventually decided to do that. So we started the project we were calling Synapse at the time, and that grew into Graphene. And once we really understood what we were building, though, we realized that it probably made sense to split it off as a separate project, because Four by that time had been around several years and had kind of formed an identity around e-commerce and applications that were developing for the blockchain. It also has applications for other cryptocurrencies that we're developing as well. So there's kind of a different direction that Four was heading compared to what we were building with Graphene. That Graphene really is this revolutionary platform. It has a very secure staking protocol. It has sharding technology. It has super high scalability. It has a lot of flexibility, which I frankly think is a bigger distinguishing feature, that you can have different types of shards, meaning you can optimize different shards, which are each their own blockchain, but they're tied together in this ecosystem. And each one can be optimized for a different use case. So for example, we're going to be launching with a blockchain called the transfer shard that would be kind of similar to what Four does and also what Bitcoin does in terms of doing fast, secure transfers, having some of the same types of features you'd expect with a cryptocurrency when you're just using it as an exchange mechanism or a store of value. And then we're going to be adding the smart contract shards, which would make it more like Ethereum in terms of what it can do, in terms of being able to do all kinds of smart contracts, tokens, DeFi, all the different things that you can do with smart contracts, which is pretty extensive to begin with. And then in addition to that, though, I mean, there's always trade-offs that you make with these different things. Like the Bitcoin style blockchain is really optimized for security and transfers, and smart contracts are obviously optimized to be able to provide all that functionality. But it's a heavy process. There's a lot of processing power. There's a lot of things going on that you have to optimize for that sort of use case. But with Graphene, we can also have other types of shards that might be optimized for things like a privacy shard, an identity shard, all sorts of different things that you could basically say, okay, if we need something with really big blocks or really small blocks or different block times or different consensus rules, we can design shards and add them to this ecosystem, and they're all tied together so you can transfer tokens across all these shards, use them as you need to or want to for different purposes. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility than what you would have with just a single blockchain where you have to make some of those trade-off choices and just stick with them. So I think that kind of addresses the next question, which is what is Graphene and about the tech. I think a little more on that would be some of the distinguishing features that would distinguish it from something like, let's say, Ethereum, because we do share some of the core protocols of Ethereum 2.0. In fact, at a certain point, we were ahead of them in the implementation of certain parts of it, and they were using parts of our code. They were using one of our cryptographic libraries for signature aggregation called BLS. And but in any case, we're doing a number of different things as well that are, I think, making it, giving it a different purpose than what you would find with Ethereum 2.0. One of those is that Four and Graphene have always been very community driven at their center. And so one piece of that is a budget governance system. So there's a piece in Four that we will be replicating a similar system in Graphene, where there'll be a set of development funds. It'll be completely decentralized. So you could think of it like a DAO. And it really is available to everybody. Our team makes proposals with Four and gets funding for what we do for Four. But that same system is available to anybody the same way it is to us. And the same thing would be true with Graphene. So whether there's someone in the community that wants to develop a new application that would enhance the ecosystem around Graphene, or whether they want to develop a new shard, or whether they might want to contribute to the core code, or even just develop an application using smart contracts on top of it, all of those things could potentially be funded directly from the blockchain using those development funds. And that's a sustainable repeating thing. So every month or every period of time, whatever we design in there, we'd be able to say, okay, anyone can make a proposal and they can get funding for what they're doing, and then the same thing will happen the next period, and it'll keep going. So I think that's a really nice mechanism that makes the blockchain very resilient and also gives it sustainability that I think a lot of projects don't have. If there's a project that does an ICO or some sort of initial fundraising, my question is always, what happens when that money runs out? If they don't have any kind of business model, if they don't have any kind of sustainable funding, I'm not sure how they're going to keep operating. So I actually prefer what we're doing to something like an ICO, even though we didn't have that big cash infusion at the start. I think I would actually prefer to have the system we have, because I think it gives us more sustainability. And frankly, it also is a lot easier in terms of the regulations, because I think based on the way it's structured, it's really not considered something that would make Four or Graphene a security. So I think basically, we can say there's never been any public fundraising. There's never been anything that was really sold as far as funds that were raised from the public. So there's really no question that these blockchains and cryptocurrencies would not be securities. Another piece of that with Graphene that goes even further is we will have shard governance, meaning that there will be a system where the community can vote on the new shard types and decide and approve which ones will go live on the system. So in addition to just the funding mechanism, there's also the actual shard types, where if someone develops a new shard, the community has a voice in terms of deciding which one of those things goes live. And based on the way we're designing that system, it would actually go live dynamically, meaning you wouldn't even necessarily need to upgrade your wallet to take advantage of a new shard. A lot of times that would be a hard fork where everyone would have to upgrade to be able to use the new functionality. In this case, we're designing it so that it would really go live by itself, kind of like uploading a smart contract, where it would just go live when the community approves it. It would be made available to people on the blockchain, and it would work without having to upgrade your wallet. So at least that's the intention of where we're going with that. There are some other technical differences. I can't really go through all the details, but one that I would point out is the shard interface itself is very different than what Ethereum is doing with their version of this. I think Ethereum's approach has been very abstract, meaning that they have left everything up to the shard developer to decide how to do every single function. And that does give you kind of ultimate flexibility where you could do really crazy things with it because it can kind of operate almost completely independently of any other rules on the system. But I think in the way we looked at it is that would create a lot of work for the shard developer because they have to do even very basic things like how do you store data on a block, or how do you, access things that are very basic things that almost every blockchain that you could imagine would probably do pretty much the same way. And so rather than making the shard developer redevelop all that code every time, we're providing APIs to the shard developers so that they can just reuse those very common functions and just do the parts that are different. So I think it'll lead to a process where it'll be a lot faster and easier to develop new shard types for the Graphene ecosystem. So I think that probably gives you a good highlight of the different technical concepts. If people have further questions about that, I can certainly elaborate on that. Next question I have on my list is, what are some of the use cases for Graphene in the future? It's hard for me to nail that down because I think it just, in my mind, has this unlimited potential because you can really design shards that could do almost any type of blockchain. The way I think about it, though, is that, again, you could almost think of it as having a combination of every blockchain you see out there in terms of like a Bitcoin style blockchain, an Ethereum style blockchain, a decentralized storage blockchain, a privacy blockchain. I mean, all those things could exist in the same system. So to me, what I think we're creating here is a new generation where you can have all these different things as part of the same system. One of the challenges you have with cross-blockchain compatibility is that they all have different confirmation times. There's a lot of security issues if you're trying to transfer things back and forth. People are doing a lot of these things with wrapped tokens and things like that. But with Graphene, you could potentially do a lot of those things all within the ecosystem. There would be no need to say, I have to go to this other one to do a smart contract or transfer things across. You could just have that functionality in the Graphene ecosystem and have different blockchains that do everything you need to do and just use it within the system. And then there's none of those problems with transferring things back and forth because the security is all built right into the ecosystem. So I think that kind of addresses the next question. There was a question about why would people use Graphene versus Ethereum and Solana. I think I've probably hit on a lot of those points. That, I have a lot of respect for all the things Ethereum's doing. I have a lot of respect for all the things Solana's doing, all the other blockchains out there that are doing things that might overlap with what we're doing. But I do think there's a lot of unique things that we're doing as well. And I think these different blockchains will have different use cases that they might be best for. And I really would leave it up to the community of Graphene to decide what do they think is most valuable and what sorts of things do they want to see. But I think one of the distinguishing differences is that voice that you have in the process. If you wanted to add a new shard type to Ethereum, good luck, I think, because it would probably have to go through the Ethereum team. You'd have to somehow get Vitalik and the rest of his team to approve that and probably implement that. Whereas the system we're building is a lot more open, where people are welcome to develop new shard types and propose new shard types. Obviously, we do want to have the community approve it. We don't want to have it be something where anything could potentially go live on the system. We want it to be something that's guided by the community, but it is something where the community has that voice, and we want to be very open to having external developers join our effort and be part of our team, essentially. And again, there's also funding available for people who want to be part of that. So I do think that's probably one of the biggest differences in terms of how we've structured this, that it really is more like a DAO structure where people can contribute to the code, people can contribute shard types, people can contribute applications, smart contracts. And as the ecosystem gets built out, I think the community will be able to guide where they want it to go and what sorts of use cases they want to see. All right. The next question is when Moon. I know that's a common question in a lot of crypto. I generally can't really comment on price as it comes to that sort of thing. So that's really my standard answer when that question is asked. What I would say is the market determines the value, and I don't control the market. So, the market can decide how much Graphene is worth at any given point in time. What I would say, though, is that our focus as a team is to make Graphene as valuable as it can be, to achieve the vision that we've set out, to develop new visions of where we're going to go, and to listen to the community and to implement the things that the community wants to make it into the most valuable set of technology and products that we can make it. And I would also just say that I really see this as the beginning of a journey. I think we're still very early in the journey. I mean, I've been in crypto now since 2017, so maybe to a lot of people that's a long time. But to me, I just see that as the beginning. I think, we originally did set out with this vision of having this type of system, and we're getting a lot closer to being able to bring this live as the main net for Graphene. But even then, I would consider that kind of like the starting gate for Graphene. I think there's going to be a lot of new shard types that will develop, a lot of smart contracts, DeFi capabilities, things that maybe people haven't even imagined yet that we'll be creating once we get the full functionality of the platform up and running. So I just see this as we're kind of getting to that starting gate, and then I see it from there as just growing and expanding from that point. All right. The next question I have is, what is the schedule of the token release? Now, obviously, the first airdrop was already done from the first snapshot from the 4 blockchain on October 11th. Right now, I would say we are discussing the schedule for the rest of it internally, and we're also looking for community feedback on this. I think we certainly expect it to be, in the short term, meaning a matter of weeks, to at least have the next airdrop. I think there is some discussion about, should we do all the other airdrops at one time once it's all ready, or should we do them one at a time and space them out? So if the community does have feedback, I'm very open to hearing about that, and I'd like to see how people feel about it. But otherwise, as a team, we are discussing that, and we're trying to determine exactly what the best timing would be to do the next ones. There is some effort involved in terms of preparing each airdrop, and we've been going through most of that. I would say a lot of that is complete for, airdrops 2, 3, 4, but not necessarily for all the way through the end of 6. So part of that effort is making sure we do have the full snapshot analysis of exactly what the balances are, that we've removed all the addresses that shouldn't be part of that, which would include things like Cryptopia and other exchanges that are either defunct or did not decide to support the airdrop for their users. So we're going through that due diligence process, making sure that's all prepared for each of the airdrops as we go through this process. But again, we're also just discussing different options in terms of the timing, and we'll certainly make announcements once those things are final. And as I said, we're certainly open to feedback from the community about what you'd like to see there. The next question is when the Graphene mainnet would go live. I don't like to promise dates before I'm really confident that we can hit them, so I'm not going to be able to give you a specific date, but I would say I certainly expect it to be in 2022, and that, within that time frame, we'll have to see exactly where it falls. We're working hard on it. It is largely complete on the back end, I would say. And a lot of the work we're doing right now is just building out the front end interface for the wallet and making sure that we're going through a thorough testing process and audit process and making sure that everything is really solid before we go live with the mainnet. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And we're moving forward with the rest of the design and the implementation to make sure that everything's ready and that we're going to be able to do a successful launch when we get to that point. So that's the best I can do in terms of timing at this point, but certainly as we get closer, we think we'll be able to hone in on that time frame a lot better. The final question I have here on the list is, will the Graphene mainnet bridge to BSC? And I think the answer is certainly yes, at least especially from the sense that the BSC token that was launched would be converted into Graphene native coins. So similar to the airdrop process that we just rolled out for airdropping Graphene tokens to floor holders, we're going to have a process to convert those into native Graphene coins on the Graphene mainnet once it's launched. We'll actually have to do that because we're going to need a certain number of Graphene coins to be able to launch the network. We'll need people to run validators to do a lot of the work that the network requires. So we'll be looking to recruit people to say, do you want to be part of this launch? And do you want to run validators as part of it, to help us get this started? So as we get closer to that launch process, you'll be hearing a lot more from us, and we'll be designing a process for you to do that. I think there probably would be an ongoing bridge back and forth to be able to, interact with the BSC ecosystem. So I think there probably would be more links than just that conversion process. But, there certainly will be links back and forth between the token and that exists today and the mainnet that we'll have once the mainnet is available. All right. So I think that's the complete list. And at this point, maybe I'll just ask, you'll have to forgive that I'm not super familiar with how this Telegram the video works. So I'm not exactly sure how to invite people to speak, but if anyone else has a question and you know how to do that, feel free to jump in at this point.
Hey, Mike. No one's really speaking up, so I'm reading some of the commentary on the Telegram here.
Yeah.
Someone asked about centralized exchanges and what your plans are for that. That's just one of the questions I see there, so I
Hmm.
thought I would ask that.
Yeah, well, there's certainly, I mean, we would certainly be pursuing exchanges at the right time for graphene. I think the question I would have about that when I just, in terms of how I think about it right now, is that we have the token that exists today already available on PancakeSwap on the Binance Smart Chain. So there's already an exchange available for anybody who wants to use it. It's completely decentralized. Anyone can use it. So I think there is a place for people to trade it. And I guess my question would be in terms of pursuing other listings. I think there are other places. In fact, I think StakeCube is already listing graphene for trading purposes. And there may be others that become available that are just wanting to list graphene, which I think would be great. I just don't know if we would put a huge amount of time and effort and money into saying, let's secure a listing at this point, just because it would be listing a BSC token instead of potentially waiting ready to launch the mainnet and then get listings for the actual native graphene coin. So we certainly would be open to considering that. And if there are specific exchanges that the community would like to see, we can certainly pursue that and see if we can make that happen. I just think personally, it seems to me like it might make more sense to wait until the right time, meaning that the mainnet is launched for graphene, and we want to make sure that there are exchanges available to trade that, since it's a native coin and it wouldn't really have that built-in DEX capability that the tokens have.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. And one other question, and I'll leave the floor to anybody else. Um, they're asking, a couple of people asked, how many coins eventually once mainnet is available? How many coins do you think it might take to become a validator? And that's they're all for me. There's a few other questions that people have asked,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll leave the floor to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't formally said here's exactly what the validator collateral will be, but I could give you an idea of what we've thought about and where we think we're headed with it. The starting as a comparison point with a 4 masternode, a 4 masternode takes 10,000 for. I would say that's a relatively large amount, given that the supply of 4 is only 23 million, so it's more significant from a percentage basis than what we would want to see with graphene. We want to make it more available to more people without having it be a really high price point for someone to be able to run a validator and get rewards. One of the reasons for that is that the validators are basically doing a lot of the functions that a masternode in 4 would do, but also doing the staking function. So it's kind of combining those two functions, at least in terms of the equivalent of what's happening on graphene. And so we'd want to make that very decentralized and have as many people able to run nodes that want to. The architecture with graphene really is different in terms of the requirements of what it would take to run a validator in terms of technical requirements. So we don't know for sure. We have to go through some more testing to verify this, but the initial thought we had was that you might be able to run about 100 validators in the same compute space as one 4 masternode. So if you use as an example a $5 per month VPS on Vultr, which is a typical setup for someone to run a masternode for 4, we're thinking you might be able to run 100 validators in that same $5 per month VPS. So it's a very different technical profile. One of the differences is that with a 4 masternode, every masternode needs its own copy of the blockchain, and the blockchain size keeps growing. So the disk space and some of the RAM requirements essentially grow over time as the blockchain grows. And that's just built into the architecture, all the way from Bitcoin, really, because that's partly what that's based on. And with graphene, though, it's very different. It's really more like you're just syncing to the latest state of the blockchain. And so it's very much the case that not every node needs a full copy of the blockchain. Yeah, I think every node would need access to the beacon chain, which is the part that ties everything together. But even that could potentially be shared amongst multiple validators. So you could potentially say I have one instance of the beacon chain running, and then I have 100 validators that are all using that instance of the beacon chain. So from a technical perspective, it would potentially be a lot less costly to run, which means it wouldn't have a baseline cost that would be very much to overcome. So the way I'm thinking about it is you need to be able to give people enough rewards that it's profitable to run a validator, that people will want to run them, But at the same time, we want to keep inflation low overall. We don't want to have just, huge amounts of supply being added all the time. So those are the two biggest balancing factors. Now, in terms of the collateral itself, I think originally we were thinking along the lines of that 1 to 100 ratio, meaning if we had, let's assume that the supply of 4 and the supply of graphene were equal, then maybe from that 10,000, we might go down to 100, right, as the collateral. But since we also increased the supply by 10 times, we might adjust it up 10 times and say maybe 1,000 graphene would be something in the range of what we'd be looking at. I don't want to say that as a final number because we need to really analyze all the tokenomics and make sure that we're all in agreement and that everything seems to work and fit together. But I think as a general ballpark, that's kind of where we were thinking, was that maybe something like 1,000 graphene would be enough to run a validator. And again, that could be adjusted. And if there's feedback from the community on whether they think it should be more or less than that, we can talk about it. But some of those other factors that I mentioned would come into play, right? You have to understand, what is it going to cost to run a validator? Are you going to be able to get enough rewards to pay back what you're doing? Would it require too much rewards where it would just be, making a lot of inflation for the coin? So we have to take all these things into account. But within that framework, I certainly would want to get feedback from the community about what they think and what they want to see in terms of the collateral amount.
Hello, does this work?
It does. I can hear you. Who is this?
Oh, I'm Biboran. Speaking right now. I have 3 questions. Can I ask you 3 questions?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Good ones. First one is, what is the current TPS of the Graphene coin in testnet right now?
Well, I don't think we've really done a full scalability test. The estimates that we've come up with are basically, based on the design. So we haven't tried to say, let's actually run this through and pump as many transactions per second as we can. But I think given the way that the architecture is designed, I would expect it to be very highly scalable. And until we run it, I wouldn't be able to give you a specific number to say, here's exactly what's running. So I can't really give you much of a direct answer to your question, but based on just past experience of like, again, if I start with the 4 blockchain, I think that's capable of doing about 70 transactions per second. But with Graphene, it would potentially be a lot higher than that. It may vary by shard type because different ones may have different characteristics, but if I just use that as a baseline, and then if I say you could potentially have thousands of shards, you would then multiply 70 times 1,000. Now, even when we added the SegWit protocol, that actually made it available to potentially do twice as many per second, because it really isn't based on the rate that transactions can be put through the system. It's more of the space on the blockchain that can fit them in a given period of time. And so potentially the shards would be able to fit a lot more than 70 per second. And so again, if you went to 140, then you would then double the estimate. I mean, the math can go everywhere. I don't necessarily want to quote a really big number, but we do think that it probably would easily be 100,000 transactions per second across all the shards. And because you just would have potentially many shards running in parallel. But I would also say that's the theoretical maximum. Like when we start, we probably would just have a small number of shards that would do what they're capable of doing. And then as we reach the need to add capacity, we can add more of the same shard type to increase the capacity. So I don't think we would just start by saying, let's make 1,000 shards, because there wouldn't necessarily be a need for that. But as we see what the demand is, and as we see that blocks are getting full or the fees are starting to go up, we can add more capacity and add more of different shard types based on that demand. And I would want to keep it somewhat flexible, saying if there's a lot of demand for a transfer shard, we'll add more of those. If there's a lot more demand for smart contract shards, we'll add those. So we'd want to choose which ones to add based on what people are using, because ultimately there is a limit of how many shards you can have. There's a certain part of the protocol that would say every shard has to write a transaction to that beacon chain, and there's just going to be a certain capacity of how many transactions per second that can do. And it's not like those are 1-to-1, it's 1 to a large number, because what those transactions represent is a summary of a large number of blocks on the shard. So it's just once in a while, like maybe once every 5 minutes, that a transaction would have to be written from a shard summarizing everything that happened. It could happen more often than that, but that would be the requirement. which means at a certain point, ultimately long term, if you were reaching, the full capacity of it, you would say, okay, we can't keep adding more shards because every shard needs to do those attestation transactions. But I think, to me, I would be comfortable saying it's going to be in the hundreds of thousands as far as the total capacity of what it would be able to do. But in terms of actual testing, I would have to get back to you once we get to the point where we've done a more of a stress test.
Okay, thanks for answer. Can ask next one?
Yeah.
I've watched your other interview with YouTuber, and there you said that the blockchain is around 80% ready right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked in what time, how is it said in English? In what time can it be finished? Mainnet, you today say in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there you said that in that interview that in 12 months it for sure should be done. But many people in chat say that it will come out in first quarter of 2021. And I want to ask, before mainnet, will there be testnet?
Yes, there would be a testnet before mainnet that the community would be able to use. I think, to me, the gating factor there is that, technically, I think the code is in a state where, on the back end at least, people could run testnets now. But I don't really want to open that up to the community to run and be part of right now, only because I would expect most people would like to have that front end wallet and be able to interact with the blockchain that way. And so that's the big piece of work that we need to finish first before we get to the point where I want to open it up to people to start running a testnet and trying it out in that sense. So right now the team is working on designing and building out that front end with the user interface and all the functions that it requires to interact with the back end. And once that's ready, then I think we'd be looking to get more of a public testnet running and have people start trying it out and giving us feedback and giving us any, bug reports or other things that we need to address before we go live with the mainnet. In terms of timing, I think what I said on the other podcast is really consistent with what I just said, that it would be sometime in 2022. 12 months from a few days ago would be, sometime in October 2022. I do think that it's very likely we will be done by then. So it could be a lot sooner. I just don't know specifically, and I don't want to make promises that I'm not sure I can keep. So I just want to be somewhat vague about that until we're really closer and I can say, yes, we're actually there and there's, line of sight directly to the launch process. So the next piece is really to finish out the front end and then go through more of a public testnet and then just make sure everything's really solid from a security perspective and a performance perspective. And then once we're really comfortable that the technology is solid, we'd start that launch process, which of course would have marketing and other things associated with it as well. So it's not like we're just going to launch on a dime. We have to plan that out and make sure that we're doing that in a planned way and that we're giving people plenty of notice and we're recruiting people to participate in that process, as I said. So there's a lot of different parts to that process as we go through that change.
So as I understand, testnet likely can come in first quarter of 2022.
I think it's quite possible. I just, again, I want to make sure we have the wallet in place. So I would just say I would prefer to get back to you on a date when I know when that wallet is really getting close to complete. Because right now, from a front end perspective, we're closer to the front of that process than the back. So I just want to make sure we've gone through most of that process and I can see here's exactly what's left and here's how long I think it's going to take before I give you an estimate. But certainly given the 12-month time frame, you would expect that the testnet would come far before that. So sure, I would say that it might be reasonable to guess that it might be in the first quarter of next year.
Well, that's awesome. That's cool. And the last third question is about blockchain 4. Agree when the goals of first projects are succeeded. Most likely second project will go well too. So as I understand, the maximum TPS of 4 within all the time of development was 140 TPS.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what your question is.
what was the maximum TPS achieved by for project?
Oh, well, I think theoretically at the current state of the code, it's at 140 transactions per second. But what I would say is the goals were different with 4. There never was a goal to say we're trying to get to hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. I mean, if that was a goal, we would have done different things and approached things differently. So, I think for what 4 is doing, to me, that is a reasonable transactions per second. It's much higher than what Bitcoin can do. It's much higher than what Ethereum can do already. So I think as far as I know, we've never run into any capacity constraints with 4 where that's been an issue. And if it was, there are ways you could enhance it. You could have layer 2 solutions. You could do a lot of different things to potentially add to that capacity. I just, personally, I don't think transactions per second is the only measure that matters. I think what we've been focusing on with 4 is building out an ecosystem and building out applications that solve real problems. And to me, that's the most important thing to start with, because we need to have reasons that people want to use 4 and demand for using 4. And then when we get to the point where it might be too much demand and not enough capacity, then we can certainly address those concerns and find ways to solve those problems. But I think our vision then, and even our vision now, because 4 is continuing, it's not going away, is to focus on solving real problems for people and giving the project more utility, so that there are reasons for people to want to hold 4 and want to use 4 for real purposes that solve real problems. So a lot of the vision that we're laying out for the future of 4 has to do with it really is going to be a community-focused thing again, but I would say it's meant to be around a set of tools that are completely decentralized, but that would serve private communities. So if you have a group of people that are aligned on a purpose, you would want to be able to give them a lot of tools to communicate with each other, but also to, like the 4 marketplace, in terms of doing transactions with each other, doing maybe private fundraising for a cause, publishing content to each other, having the ability for creators to have their own private communities where they can have either subscriptions or things like that. But there's a lot more to it. I don't necessarily want to go too far into the 4 discussion, since this is focused on graphene, but I would just say that 4 is really going in a different direction, and it has, I think, a very rosy future, a very good future in front of it. We have a lot of work to do on the 4 side as well to get to where we want to go in the future, but it's just going to be a different type of path than what graphene is focusing on.
Well, everything sounds awesome. Hope in one day graphene can compete with today's top blockchain by speed Phantom, where transactions are less than 1 second. Many say that Solana is the fastest, but I think today Phantom got this place.
Yeah, again, I mean, I have a lot of respect for what all these other projects are doing, and I think we can all learn from each other. I think it's great to have competition, frankly, because I think it helps everybody innovate. And I don't really think of it as just pure competition, like where we're trying to displace other projects. I think it's something where I approach it more in a collaborative way, saying I'd love to do projects with those other blockchains, and I'd love to see where we can work together with them. And so I don't really see it as just a purely cooperative environment in crypto. I think it's something where there are a lot of use cases that a lot of different blockchains can pursue, different niches and different specialties that they can be best for. And I think graphene will have its place, and of course Ethereum and Solana will have their places as well. And so I don't really think of it in my mind as something where we're just trying to like beat them. It's more like we're trying to do something different that's better in some ways, and that is just being used for different purposes than what some of these other blockchains are being used for. And again, I know a lot of people seem to focus on speed or capacity. To me, those are important, and I think we're doing a great job with that with the graphene architecture. But I also think the flexibility and the ability to have so many different types of things you can do with the blockchain is a much bigger deal than just the pure speed of how fast a transaction can happen.
Yes, totally agree. But transaction speed is very good today too. Now crypto bank cards come out on Phantom blockchains, like JewelSwap bank card must come out and things like that.
Mhm.
So it is speed 2 is very good for the release of the technology to the public.
Yeah, and I expect we will have very good numbers to show when we have done our stress testing and when we're ready to do the launch. I just we'll have to see how it all plays out in terms of specific numbers, but I'm very bullish on that in terms of saying we're going to have a lot of capability for speed and for capacity with the graphene architecture.
Well, I think other people want to ask questions also. I took very much time. So sorry for that. Mike, thank you for the answers, and other people ask.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else like to ask a question? Not hearing anyone jump in. I think you might need to unmute yourself if you are trying to ask me a question.
Hey, Mike, I just got to ask a quick question here. I was waiting for someone else to come up, but I'm actually just, reading some more questions from the chat here. Someone just asked, Ethereum 2.0 uses sharding technology, it will use. If they're released before us, will you think it will impact the Graphene project?
I think of Ethereum as going down its own path. I think we certainly have some overlapping technology, so that is relevant, but I don't necessarily see it as, whoever comes first is going to be the winner. I mean, I think Ethereum is going to be a big player no matter what. And I think Graphene will have its own future based on what we're doing, and probably more having to do with the distinguishing characteristics that we have, being a community-driven project, having our own budget governance, having our own shard governance, being able to go in a different direction with the functionality and design of what is done, as well as what people do on the blockchain that will probably be different than what something like Ethereum is doing. So I don't really think it's a critical factor in terms of exactly where one project goes live over another. I do think that Ethereum has a lot of challenges with that because they just have a much bigger legacy platform that they're moving from. They're coming from the Ethereum 1.0 architecture, and they have to make sure everything's compatible, everything still works, that everything interoperates. And I think the latest I heard is they were actually eventually going to make Ethereum 1.0 a shard on Ethereum 2.0. So they're having to think through problems like that, whereas we have the advantage of just being able to go live with a new blockchain and not have to worry about anything that came before. So I think we may be able to move faster in a lot of ways just because we don't have to carry forward everything that's happened for years on Ethereum. But at the same time, we want to make sure we take the time to do things right and to make sure everything's working exactly the way we want it to, and that we have a solid architecture when we launch. So we'll be ready to launch when we are ready, and we'll let you know when we think it's all ready. And in the meantime, people certainly can use the BSC token if they want to be trading with each other or being ready to participate once we get to the mainnet launch.
So Mike, thank you very much. And another question, and then I'll leave the floor to anybody else that wishes to ask. Another question comes from Cryptologic. Will Graphene's mainnet interact with current dApps like MetaMask, etc.? Yeah,
definitely. We haven't enabled that function yet, as far as I know, unless someone else tells me different. But I think that's something that's easy to configure. I mean, it's really just a matter of having the API for MetaMask. So I would expect that MetaMask would definitely be one of the options you would have to interact with the Graphene blockchain.
Thank you, Mike. I'll wait a bit, but if no one comes up, I'll just keep asking questions from the chat.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Who's this?
Nice. I'm Natoshi. It doesn't matter. Basically, first of all, thank you for all the tremendously useful information that you gave us. I think you made everyone's day in this video call. And my question would be, I'm not sure if this is on the 4 website. Maybe it's there, but this one I didn't come across. That how is the team sustained Like, is there any project funding, or how is it done for the team to make a living?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So there is a built-in budget governance that I have referenced a couple times with FOR. So there's a certain amount of FOR that's generated on the blockchain every month, and our team would put in proposals asking for that funding, and then the community would approve that. And if they approve it, then our team gets that funding in FOR. And so that is the primary source of the built-in funding that comes to the team today. We will have a similar mechanism with Graphene once it goes live. So there will be a similar funding mechanism there. But obviously, since we don't have the mainnet ready yet, we don't have that mechanism live. We may be able to consider seeing if we could start that with the BSC token, because I know we're planning on enabling staking and things like that. So we may also be able to enable a development fund to start as well. But that is something we haven't really discussed in detail, so I'm not sure if that would happen in the meantime. But as another part of the answer to your question, our team actually does do other work for other projects as well. So I have another company name called Blockchain Builders, and we've helped many other projects launch coins or just do ongoing development for other projects. And that is one of the sources of our team's income. So, in the 2018, 2019 period, it was pretty much a crypto bear market all around. The value of a lot of coins was going down, and I realized that we needed another sustainable revenue source. And so at the same time, there were other projects asking me for help and saying, hey, we really like what you're doing. Could you help us with our project? And so we started taking on some of those projects, and we're building up a client base in addition to what we're doing on Graphene and FOR. And I really see this as a very synergistic thing. I wouldn't want anyone to misinterpret this as saying like, oh, are you distracted with all this other work? Because I think it really feeds right back into what we're doing. A lot of the projects that we work on are very similar in code to what we're doing. So it's not really like a different type of technology that we're working on. And it, again, allowed us to grow our team in the middle of this bear market instead of having it shrink like a lot of projects did, or some of them probably didn't even make it through. And so I think, that really did provide a lot of sustainability to the team and continues to do so. And I think it also helps our team develop deeper skills in terms of blockchain, and makes us a more talented and more capable team, and really does fund the efforts of what we're doing with Graphene and what we're doing with FOR. So, that will continue to happen in the background. It's not really something I would necessarily talk about a lot within the context of Graphene or FOR, but it is something where we are looking for new clients. We're growing that client base to be able to fund the efforts of what we're doing. And again, I really see it as a supportive effort of saying it's going to help us get to the finish line of Graphene. It's going to help us fund everything we're doing and just accelerate the development of what we're doing. So that's more of a full answer to your question, that we do have other revenue streams that support the team. So we're not totally dependent on the price of FOR or the price of Graphene. That we actually try not to sell that because we want to keep it ourselves, frankly. We believe in the project and we believe in the future. So most of the time I'm a net buyer of FOR myself, and I would expect the same to be true of Graphene over time. So, we don't really look to try and like sell lots of it. It's more something we want to preserve as much as we can. So we do pay a lot of that development fund out to developers, and we don't control what they do with it. So if someone needs to sell their tokens to live on, I certainly understand that. But, we try to minimize that as much as we can and use other funds where we can to sustain the team.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, for the answer. I really appreciate it. And yes, then definitely FOR and now Graphene is the most fair blockchain technology I've ever met. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's another aspect we haven't really discussed on this call, at least, is the whole history of FOR started out as a fair airdrop. And in fact, it didn't even start with FOR. The original blockchain was called CryptCoin, and it started in 2013, which was long before I was part of the team. But that was launched as a completely fair airdrop where the original developer just took one share along with everybody else. And that had its own life cycle. I think the developer ended up getting sick and it kind of went dormant for a while. And then when he got better from his sickness, he decided he was going to relaunch it as FOR, and he did a swap from CryptCoin to FOR. and now we're doing an airdrop from 4 to Graphene. So really all along, it's been starting from an airdrop that was given to people a long time ago. It's just whoever wants to buy or sell it since that point. And again, there's never been any external funding, anything like that, other than, of course, what we're putting into it ourselves. But it's really always been a self-funded project by the community. So I think that is kind of a unique aspect where many other projects, they may have done a bunch of fundraising up front. And again, then they have to deal with a lot of the security regulations and things that come with that. I think we've been lucky that we've been able to avoid that sort of characterization for our projects, which I think would also make it, make the project more resilient in the future. Like, for example, if there was a regulated exchange in the United States that said we're not going to list any security tokens, we would potentially be eligible for that, where another project might not be.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, because nobody is talking, maybe I will ask you one crazy idea. The blockchain is not ready yet, yes, but there is this idea with bank cards I told you today. So there is little input, so you understand what I'm talking about. Now there is a decentralized Joule card from Joule Swap on Phantom blockchain ready to become. And with this, I personally had an idea, invented in my mind. Now many coins connect to different blockchains. So the coin is on Ethereum blockchain, BSC blockchain, Gecko blockchain, and one coin, 1 equals 1 on all of them, yes? And why not make a crypto bank card connected to the wallet, like Joule Swap wants to make, and this connects the physical world, the traditional world fiat, with crypto. With that card, you can pay in markets, and imagine if you make this thing, if all blockchains, if your coin is on all blockchains combined, for example, GFN is on BSC and all blockchains. If you make this and connect it to the card and make auto conversion of any coin on the card and to GFN or the main token of the project, and with that token convert it to dollars or euro and pay with that in the market. How do you think? Can this be possible? If the blockchain goes good, have big power, big money?
I certainly think it's technically possible, and I think it sounds like a great idea. Would you like to build it?
Of course.
I mean, the focus of my team right now is on building out the platform. So that's our top priority. So at this point in time, I'm not going to be pursuing a bank card project because that would distract from everything else we're doing. But
that is why it's the idea.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I do think I would love to see that ability with Graphene and probably 4 as well, but at least with Graphene as a starting point. And I do think we're probably going to have the wrap token concept where we would potentially have Graphene tokens continue to live on the Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, other blockchains that support that sort of wrap token concept where it could be on different blockchains at different times. And so I certainly think everything you're talking about sounds like it would be technically possible. And I would love to see someone who wanted to build out that as a business to build that out for Graphene. So if you're interested in doing that, we can certainly talk about it and see if we can make that happen over time.
Well, if anyone builds this for the idea, would be good if they give 1% to me for the idea of income.
Yeah, well, the one thing I would say is, like, to me, execution is the hard part of everything.
Really cool.
You know, I mean, there's lots of good ideas out there, and I think your idea is a good idea. I just think that my experience is that it's making it happen that's the real challenge. And
also, I know how to make it so all blockchains have different speed, right? One blockchain's work in 1 second, one in a minute.
Yeah.
But what with bank card in the store, with auto conversion, you need it so it goes in instant momentum in 1 second or like that. So Phantom is right now best for this. But I know how to make it so you can pay off any blockchain, even Bitcoin, where transaction is 60 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the model of that sort of business. Like, if I would envision how that might work, it would probably be something along the lines of a debit or a credit card. I mean, it would probably act a lot more like a debit card, but I think it would maybe have a similar mechanism where there is some sort of custody involved, potentially, where you're depositing a certain amount on this card, just like you would on a debit card. And then you'd say, okay, that balance is there. And then when you do a transaction, it may give an approval based on your balance and then be able to take that, in terms of the blockchain confirmations on the back end. Now, I can understand there may be a bit of a risk there depending on how all that works on the back end. And if it wasn't custody, if it was non-custodial, then maybe you are dependent on making sure that the blockchain transaction actually goes through before it does the charge.
But smart contract. On smart contract, if it already started, then it's inevitable, right? So
and that might the smart contract might be a kind of an intermediate stage of that, where like maybe you're depositing something in a smart contract, but you still have control over it unless you do the spending according to the rules of the smart contract. So that could potentially be something that's more in between. But I would still say it's something where potentially you can say, okay, the approval doesn't take very long for a transaction. And I really wouldn't expect that a confirmation would take more than a second or two. I think there may be other things we can do to specifically enable that type of scenario too. Like, as an example, Dash has a system for instant confirmations, and they're basically like a Bitcoin style blockchain under the covers. So you would say, well, how can they do that? But they have that built into their masternode protocol, where if you do a transaction, then the masternodes essentially watch over that transaction to make sure that it gets through and that it gets confirmed. And that's specifically designed for the type of retail use case that you're talking about, where you need to have an instant confirmation, but you don't know for sure up front that the transaction has actually gone through, and you might be worried about a double spend or something like that. So this sort of mechanism is a way that, at least from a Dash's perspective, where they've said we can basically kind of lock a transaction even before it's confirmed, to the point where we know it's going to go through, even though the block itself hasn't been written to the blockchain yet. And then that gives the merchant the confidence that they're going to get their funds, and it allows the transaction to go through a lot faster. So something like that would potentially be something we could implement as well, if we wanted to have something where you needed instant confirmations, even though, the block time on Graphene might only be like 6 seconds. So I'm not sure that really is a big issue to say you might have to wait on average seconds for an approval. But, I think if you wanted to just be totally confident that something was going through, we could potentially write some smart contracts or some other code that would say, here's a way that we can say, when you do this type of transaction on this card, that it gets locked, and it's going to make sure that it goes through, even though it hasn't, fully worked its way through the system yet.
Yes, that's the idea. So in the store, person uses the card to pay the bill. It needs to be instant, yes. But de facto, not the person, in my idea, pays the price. It's the company. In this case, GFN company pays the price itself, yes? But the person's money gets locked in smart contract. And after that, for example, here, GFN company will get that money after that anyway, back with fees and everything. So with calculations and that. So
I think it's very feasible technically to make all that happen. I think we would just need to think through how that would operate as a business, because to me, I see that as a separate business.
Yes, but this can really change the world, connect all blockchains to one, de facto, as I think.
Yeah.
Pretty cool if something like this comes at the blockchain.
I would just encourage you not stop at an idea. Why don't you actually pursue this and try and build it as a business?
What business? I'm Russian alcoholic. What business?
We have people all over the world. I don't see any limitation because you live in Russia.
For business, you need to be smart, need to be jurist, need to understand laws and everything.
Yeah, there's always a lot of challenges with any venture.
Well, I think, guys, someone thought of questions already, so your turn. Thanks, Mike, for answers.
Sure. Anyone else want to jump in?
Just one quick question, if I may, just from the chat here. People have asked a couple of times, someone just asked about liquidity concerning that. I know we have stated a few times that we were going to add after, but I'll leave it to you, sir, if you can please chime in on that.
What's the question about liquidity?
Just people have asked about liquidity and how some people would like there to be more added eventually. Obviously, I believe Thomas has stated in the past that we're going to wait for the market to kind of level out or dumpers to dump if they wanted to, and before we added more. But people were asking you that question directly. So,
yeah, I mean, I would say I would go back to my starting point of saying this is a decentralized project. This is a community-driven project. Every one of you can add liquidity. So if you want to see more liquidity, you can put some in yourself. I mean, it doesn't all have to come from me or my team. We have put in some liquidity, and we will probably continue to put in more liquidity to the extent that we can. But I would also tell you, like, this liquidity that we put in is from our own allocation of our own tokens. The Graphene tokens that we put in liquidity on PancakeSwap was the ones we redeemed from the 4 that we owned. So it's no different than if one of you put in some of your tokens and some BNB on the other side of it, or BUSD. I think there's another pair that someone else did create, and I wasn't involved with that. So someone else did take it upon themselves already to create another pair on PancakeSwap against the BUSD pair and put in some liquidity there. And so everyone that's on this call and everyone who's there, if you want to put in some liquidity, it's pretty easy to do. You can go right on PancakeSwap and say, I want to add some liquidity, and just you put in an equal amount of BNB and Graphene tokens, and then you can get the rewards that come from that. And hopefully you would lock it, because it seems like that's very important to people to know that most of the liquidity is locked for a certain period of time. And, then we can grow it as a community. But we're all in this together. It's and we will contribute as much as we can as a team to that. But I would hope that the whole community can do that. And, if you want to see more liquidity, then let's put some more in.
thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mike, this is Joseph.
Yeah. Hi, Joseph.
How's it going? Yeah, Mike's really good at technical support too, by the way. But my question is, and I might be asking something that's already been asked because I haven't been able to stay on for the whole thing. But whenever you look at Graphene and you envision a successful project, and you mentioned having a not necessarily being a competitor to any other blockchain, but what kind of projects do you think Graphene is best suited for? Or is there anything particular project that you envision? I mean, it could be DeFi exchanges or something else. I don't know, but I'm just kind of wondering, as far as utility goes, is there a project you have in mind, or something you would just love to see on Graphene, down the road once it's launched?
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly think a lot of the current state of what's going on with these different smart contract platforms, I would want to see built out on Graphene. So to me, that might be the baseline before we start going in a different direction. So what that would include would be having token standards, having other tokens that people want to create on Graphene. And then from there, you would have an exchange, something like a Uniswap or a PancakeSwap that would most likely be developed. And again, this may or may not be something that our team would make. If we need to make it, we probably will, but I would love to see other people step up and do that and have other developers and other teams that are doing work on the Graphene blockchain. So I'd love to see other people in the community step up and build some of these things. But, once we have those baseline things like the DeFi capabilities and exchanges and tokens and things like that, then I think that's where we would start exploring some of these other types of things. So as an example, I do think more complex businesses could be developed, business models that could be enabled on the Graphene blockchain. And part of the reason for that is that the code, the smart contract code that will run on Graphene compared to the current Ethereum architecture is going to run a lot faster. Like the code, my developer was telling me that the current Ethereum virtual machine on Ethereum 1.0 runs something like 200 times slower than native code on a computer. And that has to do with a lot of different things within the EVM. Part of the way it was originally designed is not very efficient. And that's one of the reasons why the transactions per second on Ethereum 1.0 is so low, is that it takes a while to run a smart contract, which also means you have to limit how much code can run in a smart contract to that maximum gas limit so that you're not letting someone monopolize the whole blockchain, right? But the Graphene architecture uses something called WASM, which is WebAssembly language, and that runs a lot faster than what the Ethereum virtual machine process uses. Probably 100 times faster, I think. It's more like twice as slow as native code would be, as opposed to 200 times slower. So what that means is you could potentially do a lot more within a smart contract without having to run into some limit of being able to fit in a block or, run out of gas or things like that. And so you could potentially have much more complex smart contracts that you would be able to enable on that. And then on top of that, given the additional capacity, you might be able to chain together a lot of these smart contracts and build kind of a completely decentralized business where everything is pretty much automated and running on the blockchain, and you can do really advanced things with it that might not be possible on some of the other current smart contract blockchains. So I know that's kind of an abstract answer. It's not really specific, but I do think there's a lot of different things you could think about for that. I mean, one idea that I would have would be some kind of social network where you could have something, let's say like Twitter or Facebook or one of the, pick your model, I guess, of which kind you would want to see. But you would potentially be able to say that could operate on a blockchain in a completely decentralized way. And that really there would not need to be a centralized platform, because if you look at how these social networks operate, they have massive data centers with all these different things that they have to do on the back end to make it all work. I would love to see a social network where it's just a decentralized protocol. People are just able to interact with each other directly, and there's no centralized platform. Nobody's collecting all your data. Nobody's controlling or censoring your data. There might be some community moderation things, because otherwise some of these places can look kind of like garbage. But, I'm assuming those are all solvable problems that have been solved in many cases already. So we can apply those same learnings to this protocol. But I would love to see something like a social network that would be just completely decentralized, not have some, central authority that's deciding who can post what or banning people from the platform and things like that. So to me, that would be a great application to see. And if we needed to devote one or more shards to that, I would love to do that. That could basically give it a dedicated space where it wouldn't be competing with any other use case. And it might be something where you could optimize the consensus rules for that particular blockchain to do that concept. And again, it would then be able to also interact with the DeFi capabilities and all the other things that are going on in the ecosystem on other shards. So to me, these things would all also be something where they could all be tied together, right? Where you could potentially use that social network, maybe something like Telegram, where you could have bots and things where you can interact with it and not only have the chat and the channels and communities within the platform, but you could also have financial transactions and other things going on within the same platform. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
Hey, Mike, I have a question about 4, if that's all right. I hope it wasn't asked already, but I missed it if it was.
Go ahead.
I just want to know, the Graphene liquidity on PancakeSwap has been pretty good, especially in compared to the 4, not liquidity, or just like the average trading volume. Is there a plan, or is it feasible to, I'm not sure if this is the right word, but to like wrap the token into something that could be on the Binance Smart Chain and throw it up on PancakeSwap?
Yeah, that's definitely possible, and it's probably something we will do. We've talked about it, and I think everyone on the team thinks it's a good idea. But I think we just wanted to wait timing-wise, because it would have been really complicated if we had BSC tokens for 4 while we were still taking the snapshots, right? Because then people who had the 4 token on the snapshot on the BSC would say, well, how do I get my allocation? And that's a completely different architecture, right? There's no way to do the same kind of proof from the 4 wallet then. So we wanted to just get through this airdrop process, and then we'll probably look at doing that.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure. Anyone else? All right, Angel, any other questions you want me to cover before we wrap up here?
Let me just. I think that's about it on my end. I was trying to go through them all. There's so many. Let's see here. Someone's asking about. Oh, right. Someone's asking about. I think Capex was asking about if we can make a tutorial for adding on liquidity. I think Capex. I think there's a couple of tutorials out there, and I think what Mike had actually. I'll let you answer that, Mike. It's your AMA.
I certainly can, but I might even be able to just do that right now for you. It's not hard. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Mike, by the way, I don't know if you meant to do this video, but it's been audio the whole time. So just to let you know.
You can't see me?
Oh, nope. I don't. Oh, there we go. You can see it.
I thought I was on video this whole time. Can you see my screen now?
No, now I can. Now we can see. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize for that. I thought I was live on video, but I guess not. I was trying to enable my screen sharing at this point to see if I could maybe show you how to do the liquidity, because I think it's pretty easy. Let me see. Can you see this now? Can you see my screen here?
No, I can only see you. I can't see your screen sharing right now.
All right. Let me see if I can fix that. All right, let's see. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, Mike.
All right. So, I mean, really all you'd have to do is say, add Pancake liquidity or Pancake Swap liquidity. And this will give you basically a guide on how to do it, but all you really do is click on the liquidity page, I think. See if that works. And then you click on liquidity instead of exchange, because that's for trading. So you click on liquidity and you would click add liquidity, and then you'd select the currency. I think you should just be able to type in Graphene at this point. If not, you might need to add the contract number. So, just depending on your configuration, maybe you need to do that. And then you would pick the pair. So if you wanted to do it for BNB, you would click there. And then you would just put in how much you want to put in. Like if you want to put in 1,000 tokens, it would tell you how much BNB you need to put on the other side. And you just click supply and say confirm. And then I think it should pop up with your MetaMask, I believe. Let's see. Well, there we go. And then it'll confirm the transaction there. And you just click confirm, and then it would give you that additional liquidity. So that's really all it is. If you want to add liquidity, that's how you do it. The only other thing is, again, for the locked liquidity, that would be a separate process. So I think, what is it? Angel, do you remember the place we used to do that? Was it DX Tools?
Yeah,
or DX Sale.
DX Sale.
So I think there are different places where you can lock liquidity, but this is the one that we were using was DX Lock. So you would just go to lock LP tokens. Once you have that, you need to actually have done the liquidity first, because it gives you a certain number. I think they're called cake tokens. And then it would come up with this interface where you would be able to put in your address. And then, in this case, you can see I already have this locked liquidity where we've put in these different pieces that we've put in there. And once you put in this, it would just go through a similar process like the one we just saw to say, okay, you can, it connects to your MetaMask wallet with those cake tokens, and it would just lock it for a certain period of time. So for example, this one's locked until May. This one's about the same. And if you wanted to change it, you can always extend the lock and put in, a new time, things like that. So that's essentially the locking process. It's all pretty simple from what I can see. So I think, maybe that's a little mini tutorial for you right there. And if you have any other questions about that, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mike. I had another question. I'm just reading of the chat here. So somebody asked about employment at Graphene. They said, what kind of roles would still be up for employment? I've done my BSc in mechanical engineering, but I'm not really looking to pursue that profession. Would there be something a person with my qualities could add to the company, or is it not really an option for me? I hope this is not a stupid question. No question is stupid. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Well, I mean, I think to me, like, we can certainly talk about your background and see if there's a fit for something like that. I think it isn't something I would necessarily address like one-on-one right here on a call, but if you want to reach out to me, we can certainly talk about your background and the different opportunities we have on the team and see if there's a good fit.
Thank you, Mike. Another question. I did see here, someone was asking about a roadmap. So they wanted to know what you have in mind, something like that. I know something hasn't been drawn up, and we've told them that it's in the works, but it's just one of the questions that just came up here.
Yeah, we are working on a roadmap. I think it's, obviously for Graphene, the main thing is we're marching towards the mainnet launch. I mean, that's really the main thing we're doing. But along the way, as we kind of outlined earlier on the call, we'll be building out the initial user interface for the wallet, making sure all of that ties into the back end, and then doing some public testnet activities to make sure everything's working well. We'll get people involved in that process to make sure you can try it out and give us feedback and see if there's anything that needs to be fixed or needs to be improved before we go live with the mainnet. And then we would go forward with the launch. I think there's still a question as to whether or not the initial launch would include the smart contract shard type. It may be that we launch initially just with an MVP, which is minimum viable product of just the transfer shard, and then we add the smart contract shard as the next milestone on the roadmap, but that's still kind of an open question. We certainly could delay the launch until the smart contract shard's ready, but I just don't know exactly what the impact of that would be. So, we may go either way on that. And then, from there, we would start building out either other shard types, or based on people's experiences from using the product, we may have a different roadmap in terms of features and things that people want to see, or things that need to be easier to use, or, things like that. So I think right now the main roadmap for Graphene is getting to that mainnet launch, but beyond that, it would probably also include some of the things like having token standards and being able to build out some of the base DeFi, the ability to do NFTs, things like that, so that at least we're kind of on par with a lot of the other smart contract blockchains that are out there. So again, that may be including people in the community that are developing those things along with us. It doesn't necessarily have to all be the people on our team doing it, but if nobody else steps up, we certainly will do it. So I just, we need to see exactly what participation we get and who wants to be part of the community in terms of development to help us along this journey. But that would be the general picture of the Graphene roadmap at this point, and it certainly will evolve over time as we see how people are using the product and what they want to see going forward.
Mike, thank you very much.
we will publish something and get it on paper just so people can see it. I'm guessing it'll also end up on the website at some point.
Right there. Thought you were done. Thank you, Mike. There's one other question, and I'll leave the floor to anybody else that wants to ask. Someone just asked, is there more info about sharding and what's in common with F 2.0? Thanks. And I know you've touched on this before earlier, but he just jumped in. Someone was asking about Vitalik too, and if Vitalik had worked on it. So perhaps if you could clarify the Ethereum part. I believe, from what I understand, they consulted with us some of the code, but if you could please answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, the interaction between us and the Ethereum team was primarily around the BLS library, which is a signature aggregation library. It's kind of a deep cryptographic thing. I don't know if I'd be able to go through the details of how it works, but at a high level, what that entails is because of the way the sharding works and the way the whole architecture is designed, in many cases, what that requires is, let's say, 100 validators to all sign off on a transaction or a block. And so you need this set of a large number of signatures from the validators that are all done very rapidly, because every block is like 6 seconds in a time slot. So, these things have to be done very quickly. And so one of the innovations with this architecture is this BLS library that lets you aggregate a lot of signatures very quickly, because without that innovation, the previous way people would have done that would have taken an exponential amount of time. The more signatures you need, it would just make the time go up exponentially and become unworkable. So the BLS library is kind of a new innovation that is being used to make it more of a linear function, meaning, okay, it takes more time to aggregate more signatures, but it's just a minimal amount of increase as opposed to just going up like a huge curve. So that was one of the pieces that's kind of underlying a lot of what's going on in the system. It's one of the more performance critical pieces because it's just being used constantly by the architecture all the time. So one of the things that Julian did as he was going through the development for it was he actually converted some of it directly to assembly language because he wanted to just have it execute as fast as it could possibly execute. So I think at the time when we were implementing this, we were further along than the Ethereum team was with implementing a lot of these things. And the Go wallet team for Ethereum actually was using our code for a while, and they even made some contributions to it to improve it. So we've had some collaboration with the Ethereum team on that front. I wouldn't say that's necessarily directly related to sharding, though. I mean, I think if I try and address that question, the concept of sharding is sort of common between what Ethereum 2.0 is doing and what we're doing. We're trying to have the same sorts of things enabled, but the approach we're taking to it is different in many cases. So as I mentioned earlier in the call, some of the common functions that would probably be the same for 99.9% of different types of shards that you might think of designing, we've developed APIs for that so that a person who's developing a shard can just use those functions and doesn't have to write them all themselves. Whereas from what I understand, Ethereum is taking a much more abstract concept to that shard interface, where it's kind of like everything's on the shard side. You don't really do anything on the other side. So it basically means even those basic functions would need to be written for every shard. And that would potentially mean you can do those things differently. So it would give you a little more flexibility on the Ethereum side, but it would also mean that it would be a much bigger process to write those shards for Ethereum, because you have to do every single function, even down to the most basic level. So I think what we're going to see is it might be a lot quicker and easier to develop a shard for Graphene, and it might be something that's more within reach of more developers because some of the basic things are done for you, as opposed to something with Ethereum where it's kind of like all abstract and it's all has to be done from scratch, and it might take a much more advanced person to work on something like that. So those are some of the key differences that I would point to in terms of how our approach to sharding compares and contrasts to what Ethereum is doing.
Awesome.
And then I guess another aspect of that is the shard governance that I don't think Ethereum would ever have, because from what I understand, Vitalik doesn't believe in on-chain governance. So he probably would never implement anything like that. But we do think that it makes sense to have something where the community has a voice and can approve which types of shards they want added to the system. And so we're going to have that approval process built in so that when someone develops a shard, they can propose that shard to the community, and then the community can review it and they can vote yes or no. And then if the community agrees that it's a good idea to add it, then it would automatically get added to the system and it would go live even without potentially requiring a hard fork or an upgrade from people to use the new shard.
Thank you very much, Mike. One more question. Someone is asking about and I think you may have touched on this before, but again, some folks have joined in just recently. Someone is asking about the airdrop schedule for the next 5 airdrops. I know we haven't set up anything yet, but if you could speak on that, someone was asking. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered this earlier. The timing isn't quite set yet. We're discussing that internally now, and we're certainly open to feedback from the community. So if you have ideas of what you would like to see as far as that goes, we're certainly willing to get that feedback from the community. I think certainly what we expect is that it would be a matter of, maybe weeks to the next couple months in general. But in terms of the specific dates, we haven't finalized exactly when the next airdrop is going to be or whether we're going to do them all separately or all together. So those are some of the things that we're talking through as a team right now. And as soon as we do have a final decision, we'll certainly make announcements to community and let you know in advance, okay, here's when the next airdrop is going to be, and here's if it's just going to be airdrop 2 or if it's going to include multiple snapshots. So we're working through some of that now. My developer's also looking at improving the process from a gas fee perspective. I know some people have thought it was too expensive, and I certainly think it's a lot cheaper than it would have been on Ethereum, but I think he has a way that if you're using the same 4 addresses and the same BSC address that you used on the first airdrop, that there may be a way that we can optimize the process so that it would use a lot less gas, because it's already been confirmed. Basically, like a lot of the verification that we were doing is saying, okay, do you own those 4 addresses? And do you own that BSC address? And so once that's been validated once, it doesn't necessarily have to be done again. So we're looking at potentially changing some of the subsequent airdrops to just be able to say, as long as you didn't change any of the information, then it can just skip that part of the step because it's already been verified, and just go through the rest of the redemption process without requiring as much gas. If you changed any of that, like if you used a different BSC address or if you had different 4 addresses, then those would still need to be verified, and that would still be the way it was working before. But potentially we may be able to reduce the gas fees on the future airdrops for a lot of people. Excuse me.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thanks for touching on the gas as well. I know that there's been a handful of people that have ran into 0.8 BNB charges, and I know we've been trying to fix that. So thank you for touching on that.
Yeah, I think the 0.8 BNB might be something where there's some kind of error. So if you do see something like that, maybe reach out to our team and see what's going on. I think when you see 0.8 BNB, what that really means is that there probably was some kind of error in the process, and we need to figure out what's wrong with the airdrop file or whatever else is going on. I think for most people it would be less than that, and so I think when you see that message in your MetaMask wallet that it says we're estimating 0.8 BNB, I think in most cases what that means is that something went wrong in the process, and we should probably just step in and look at your situation. But I think for most people it's working fine, and we can certainly address any exceptions that come up or any issues that individual people have.
Thank you very much, Mike. There's another question that somebody asked here. It's specific about sharding. They said, I don't understand much about sharding. If a shard proposal is rejected, would this result in a fork? That was their question.
So the part I was talking about specifically related to shard governance, meaning how do you approve a new shard type? Like, let's say someone said, hey, I want to add a decentralized storage shard. So they might write the code for that and propose that shard type to go live with all the consensus rules and code around that shard. Like, here's what's allowed, here's the types of transactions, here's the block time, all the different things that would have to be designed and coded for that. So once that was ready, the shard governance system would have a way of presenting that code to the community. We probably would have some kind of vetting from people on our team or other people that are, knowledgeable enough to read the code, make sure everything's okay, there's nothing bad in there, things like that. And then once we're past that initial code review stage, it would be put to a vote. And so all the people who own validators would have votes to say, do I want this thing to go live or not? The way we've been thinking about it and the way we've been designing it is that it would basically have a certain threshold for approval, and then there might be a middle ground where maybe it only got a certain number of votes, but not enough to pass. So if it passed, it would then have another period of time until it went live, but then it would automatically go live as of a certain time. If it didn't have enough votes, but it was kind of in that middle ground, it might just get deferred to the next period. So there's a chance that it might actually just carry forward and get considered again. But if it got too many people saying, no, I don't like this, or I don't want this added, then it would get rejected, and then really nothing would happen to the blockchain at that point. So I don't think there would really be any fork impact, because it really is just a decentralized approval process. And then it would either go live if enough people approve it, or it would not go live if people don't approve it. So I don't think there would really be any kind of forking involved in that scenario.
Thank you very much, Mike. If anybody else have any questions?
All right, well, we've been going around 90 minutes. If there's no other burning questions, I think I'll wrap it up here. I really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we're certainly around to answer more questions as you have them. We'll probably do another one of these at some point. So again, I appreciate everybody's time, and look forward to moving forward with you on the Graphene project. And I think we'll end it here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.